right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the City of Oneonta Planning Commission meeting of April 19th, 2023. Almost forgot the date for a second. Clerk, could you please call roll?
Chair Loudon,
Here.
Vice Chair Marina, Commissioner Maska,
Here.
Commissioner Baskin,
Here.
Commissioner Tucci,
Here.
Commissioner Tomato,
Here.
Councilmember Risborough.
Here.
Great. First off, before correspondence, I'd like to recognize that Commissioner Picardo resigned due to a schedule conflict with his teaching obligations or his class obligations.
Oh,
So
well, we were on a roll there for
we're
like
grateful
a
for
month.
I know, right? We're grateful for his service, and we wish him the best. I'm sure
Mhm.
he'll turn up on another board or commission soon.
Good.
Is there any correspondence?
There's none.
All right. Minutes from the March 15th meeting.
I wasn't here, so I can't make a motion.
Could we, I mean, I guess,
I'll make a motion for the approval of the minutes.
motion made by Commissioner Tomino, second? Seconded by Commissioner Baskin. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Okay, so new business. The first item on our agenda is was a holdover from last month, which was the review of the area variance application for 189 Main Street, put forward by DC Marketing, with the property owner being Melex Inc., or Melex LLC, headed by Joe Valetti. So I guess we could kind of start where we left off was under the MU1 form-based code. The Planning Commission is required to review the LED sign, variance application with 3 specific criteria that pose a clear distinction between our duties and the duties of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The 3 criteria are: we're supposed to look at the impact of the proposed variance or interpretation on the zoning district, in this case the MU1 district. We're supposed to look and see if the variance or interpretation meets the intent of the form-based code and the 2019 City of Oneonta Comprehensive Plan. And third, we're supposed to look at, determine what if the applicant has sought relief through all means provided by this code. I know that there was some concern about the applicant not being here to be able to answer questions, but, so I would like to open the floor for discussion amongst the commission, before to see if there's any comments from last meeting. And if there are no comments, I'd like to have Steve give a little bit more background about the sign permit application and how it was treated within his office.
Excuse me, Chair, I have a question.
Of course.
Because you just mentioned that, and I remember at the last meeting, there was a lot of discussion. So was the applicant for 189 Main Street notified that we were having a meeting? Because that was one of our things that we really wanted to have him available.
Outside of the normal notice, for our meetings, he wasn't specifically invited. I don't believe so.
What is is it the same protocol as
It's
like?
not a public hearing, so it's separate from, like, an application goes for a variance or a site plan review or something of that nature, it triggers a public hearing, which then requires legal notice in the newspaper in the form of a business ad, notification to the applicant and neighbor mailings for surrounding 300 feet. This is an administrative review, it doesn't require that. Notice was given to the paper, notice is sent by email every week of the meetings coming up. It's on our website, it's on our, it's.
So, that's
Yeah.
just, okay, I get that, Carrie. So, Chair, do you know if the applicant was notified that he was coming to this meeting?
I
I didn't specifically notify him, but the application has the applicant and the area variance application have nothing to do with the review of this.
No, it'd be nice to have him, the applicant there, but at the same time, even though they submitted the incorrect application, there's more than sufficient information in the packet to make, to satisfy the conditions of the review, at least in my opinion. And he will be present at the ZBA meeting where the variance application will be decided upon.
And he's already been sent notice for that meeting.
That's this one?
So basically in a week.
Yeah.
And I think that, I can, you know, representing the planning commission, I can be there. Or if other commissioners would like to be there, I won't stop them either. See, anyone wants to go?
When is the meeting?
I think it's
It's
next
next
Thursday.
Wednesday.
Oh,
Same time.
Yeah.
Won't be here.
Oh, it's on
Sorry.
Wednesday?
Now, will this eventually be open for public comment, or are we gonna move on this tonight, or?
So the process here isn't, you're not reviewing the area variance. What you're saying
Right.
is, we have an area variance. The area variance includes digital signage. It includes a sign that is larger than is permitted. It includes the expansion of a non-conforming sign. The purpose of this review is to talk about whether those criteria, whether those physical facts will impact the overall zoning scheme of downtown Oneonta. The idea is that then you would provide that to the zoning board, who would look at that as part of the overall application.
Okay.
And they would determine whether they felt that it met the criteria of an area variance.
Okay, thank you.
And traditionally, our boards have not really communicated, with the exception of Hawk Hill, I think, since I've been chair, I guess. And this allows us to coordinate, you know, review and provide input. And
This section of code was specifically added because the former chairman of the ZBA claimed or stated that the planning commission and the ZBA did not communicate enough in regard to variance requests. So we added this section of code to provide communication, well, force communication between those two boards on applications.
And so this would be us coming to agreement on a, you know, way to communicate kind of the facts of this, you know, I guess application. Is there any other comments from the commissioners?
But there will be public comment at the
Correct.
ZBA.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
there-
that's where it'll be
At
discussed.
the ZBA, okay.
Yeah, there'll be.
That's where it's specific application.
Right,
In
no.
our,
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up.
in our eventual correspondence will be treated as such, same way, basically public comment.
Just
Okay.
public comment.
A little bit more detail.
So the applicant, so if things like this come to the board again, the applicant, just so I understand, the applicant does not necessarily have to be notified.
Yeah, because you're not talking about his application, you're talking about the impact of a potential LED sign in the zoning code.
Okay.
Got it.
Yeah. So
You're not saying we don't like Lynn's sign, you're saying there's a guy applying for digital signage downtown. He's required to get an area variance. Any new digital signage would be required to get area variance.
Gotcha.
So it's more like looking at the use in absence of the person, and how it would affect the zoning code and the comp plan, whether it's consistent with the comp plan and whether, basically the facts that would already happen. And then we provide those comments. Of course, like I said before, it would be nice if he, you know, the applicant was here, but I think for our purposes, it's not necessary. I think if the commission prefers, if we have these types of review in the future, we can certainly invite the applicant going forward. Is that something that we'd wanna do?
Yeah, I actually feel more comfortable with that, only because then we can ask questions, get answers, especially with this one, because there's a lot of like confusion. Maybe it's because it's the first one we've gotten or whatnot, and that's why at last month I thought that we were kind of all in agreement, like it would kind of be nice if the applicant, whoever it is, could be here to ask questions. I don't know if that's something you can add in. Is this something that we are not able to table because it's on the zoning thing, or they have to have something?
I
Only
think-
because we haven't.
I think we're required to do it, and if we don't do that, then I think,
They would have to table the variance.
They would have to table in their meeting.
yeah.
I gotcha.
And I mean, I think like, again, you know, having, you know, as I'll discuss kind of when I get into kind of my comments or what I found, you know, the applicant, you know, has read the form-based code multiple times. He's voted affirmatively to adopt the form-based code. He's in many public settings. He said he supports the form-based code. So you know, there's reasonable evidence in the record and elsewhere to demonstrate that he understands what's in here. So if he knew that he needed a variance, he could be reasonably argued that he would know that we'd be doing this, I think, but based on kind of what he's done. Because the council has had multiple public meetings discussing the MU1 code, and there was a vote, and there's an adoption process, and the law's been in effect for over a year.
He's also aware that we talked about it at our last planning commission meeting.
I mean, I think there's like, you know, we can certainly, I think, you know, I agree personally that we should make the effort to invite them, going forward. And, you know, if they don't come, we can say we'll just move forward anyway. But if we'll just make that as a courtesy invitation. It doesn't have to be, it can be like an email, it doesn't have to be like an official
Right,
notice or something,
right.
since it's an administrative, review. So, does anybody have any comments about the kind of review? Have you had a chance, has anyone had a chance to look?
I missed, last month's meeting, so I missed a lot of the discussion, so I'll just kind of sit back and absorb it all, which is what I do every meeting.
Were you here last month? So I feel like Sam and I were here. I mean, I don't wanna table his meeting that he has next month, or, next week, but, you know. I mean, I guess it's your call, Danny. I mean, I would make a motion to table this, so, you know, only because I think that there's a lot of unanswered questions, and we have two people on the board that weren't here. Steve, are you not happy with that?
I mean, so the sign's already been installed, so it's not like
Oh.
tabling his application is going to change anything about the current sign. I mean, so either you table this meeting and table the area variance, or, I mean, I don't really care either way.
I
Like, if-
think like in the grand scheme of things,
this isn't, this, I guess what I'm saying is this isn't an application that's like on the, you know, burner waiting for someone to do something. It's already been done. The sign's already installed. So
so.
I don't really care either
So I
way.
guess there was a motion made by Commissioner Kamino, just following protocol. Is there a second? To table?
How do you feel about that, Sam? I mean, we can,
I don't know how necessary it is, I guess, if it's already it's been installed, it's kind of done at this point. How necessary it is for us to have him here to ask him questions at this point, I don't know. It seems like, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's necessary to have him here, just to have him delay it another month for an area application.
A second?
so you're not seconding my motion. That's why I was asking if he was gonna second it,
Yeah.
but he's not seconding my motion. Okay.
Um,
I think in the future, we could definitely reach out, I think that's a good idea to reach out to people in the future.
why don't we just make a motion to that effect and say, you know, the position, preference of the planning commission is to invite, you know, future variant, I guess, future applicants for variance to, you know, come to this type of a meeting, I guess, come to meetings where we make these kind of decisions going forward.
Alright, so I'm gonna mark Anna's motion as fails, no second. Is that, so we can,
Sounds really mean.
Yeah, it does, right?
Failed.
Is there,
You
so
gotta
do we
wait these
need,
people.
I guess we could.
Unsustained.
Do we need a motion to, you know, invite up, you know, future?
you can just.
I guess we can just,
Direct that as part of your.
I guess let's just, are we in agreement that that's something we wanna do?
Yeah.
Yep.
So, going forward, Steve, if you wouldn't mind, you know, providing some background on the whole genesis of this, you know, sign installation, like from,
So what happened is, the sign was expanded, we became aware of it, we contacted the building owner, or the building manager, I guess, and, informed them they needed to file a sign permit, because technically, the code says that for you to go through the process of even applying for variance, you have to have been denied something, so the individual filed a sign permit. He requested the attorney to weigh in on so we essentially denied it. He requested the attorney to weigh in on it. The attorney was in agreement that it didn't meet the requirements of the zoning code. We sent a denial letter outlining the exact sections that were in violation. We requested a zoning variance application, and the applicant eventually filed that zoning variance application, which then triggered this review process. So the applicant, as part of the code, is obviously going to the zoning board to seek relief from the zoning code, and that is why you guys have to provide this input on his sign.
and then after receiving the denial in writing, he installed it anyway.
No, he installed the sign first.
First, oh,
Yeah, the sign was installed. We became aware of the sign when it was installed.
I see.
Yeah. So the way zoning land works is you can't deny something that was never applied for. So I can't just go, hey, you have to file for a zoning variance. Technically, you have to then file a permit. I then review it, I then deny it, I issue a written statement saying your permit is being denied for these specific reasons. So that's how the process works. So even if someone builds something like without a permit and it's like in the setback, we would send a violation notice, we'd say you have to get a building permit, you have to, so that we can then deny it in writing and say this is why it's denied. So,
Stephen, how often do we have contractors in the city doing work without a permit?
oh, all the time, we find it all the time. Yeah.
Contractors.
Oh yeah, pretty regularly. It's a mixed bag. I mean, let me reword that. Some people are good about getting permits, some people are not, and then there's a gray area where some people don't know that they need a permit.
Do you think that was the case here?
I don't know. That's what was claimed. The position is that this is a pre-existing non-conforming sign. The code says that any change to the sign facing requires a permit. So it's kind of a, you know.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
So, in the event that a contractor or an applicant does the work already,
Yep.
then what happens? I mean,
Well, so they'd have to file a zoning variance. So this is
but the work's already been done, so then
Yep.
what's required from the, obviously they have to get the paperwork so that way we have it on file and
Yep.
you can do your, but it's like, like Sam said, it's already done.
Yep.
So,
So the applicant, like here, has to get an area variance because the sign is too big, it's LED, it doesn't fit the new zoning code.
and
So,
then through that board, if they okay it, then it's a go, and if they don't okay it, then they deal with whatever the
So if-
ramifications are after that. It has nothing to do with us.
right,
Okay.
yeah. So you guys aren't approving or denying a sign.
Okay.
What you're doing is you're saying, what is the impact of installing, or what would the impact be to permit or approve signage like this in the downtown?
So did they add on to the existing sign? I'm thinking about the one that's right on the front, on Main Street. They added.
Yeah,
on.
so there used to be a small section of the sign that was digital, and then above it said 189 Main. The entire sign face is now digital signage.
So they basically they had like a holder, like I guess a, I don't know what you would call it, like a, maybe a sign frame, and they took the, interior, or the sign face out, and they removed it and put in an LED sign, and they cut into the other piece that I thought, was in violation of the code, was like they can't expand, non-conforming use, or the degree of non-conformity, I guess, for a particular aspect.
Right, so if the applicant would have installed an LED screen where there was an existing LED screen, that would just be a replacement. That would be maintaining the level of nonconformity that was already there.
But in this case, it was.
But once you expand that level of nonconformity, that's when you
expressly
trigger it.
prohibited.
That's when you trigger an area variance. So, but we would theoretically be having the same discussion if someone installed a wooden sign that was
Massive.
70 square feet and, so it's not just the LED aspect of it, it's the size, it's the type of sign that was installed, it's the location. So once you start messing with non-conforming things, you start triggering new codes. And that's true whether you're building a house, fixing a house, installing a sign, putting in a hot water heater. Like, once you start messing with stuff, when you start messing with things that don't conform, you then have to conform.
I mean, again, I think like going back to the question of knowing versus not knowing, I find it difficult to, it's hard because we're not in their head. They could have ostensibly voted to adopt the code, said that they reviewed the code and not actually read the code. That could be a big possibility. So it's difficult to assume, for me to assume that he, did know, but, all signs point towards that. They have, clear understanding.
Well, we discussed that code before we voted on it for months. I think it was a year.
Multiple council meetings, multiple planning commission meetings. And then, you know, it is worth noting, I mean, I'll get to this in kind of the correspondence that I'd prepared, prior to the meeting, was that this is the second LED sign that they've installed downtown, this, you know, particular applicant, and the second time that they're applying for a variance, correct?
After it was installed?
Well,
No,
so,
no.
so just to clarify, the old MU1 code permitted digital signage. So the Foothills sign was not, it did not require an area variance because of the LED. It required an area variance due to the size. So all of the signs that are downtown that are non-conforming or that have received area variances have so far been due to size. So there's a large billboard on top of, as you come into Main Street, that required a variance because of its size and a couple other design elements on it. The one at Foothills was installed, it required a variance because of its size. That application was made to the zoning board before the sign was installed. The Foothills made that application and received an area variance. They then managed to install a sign that didn't conform to the area variance they were granted. So we had to put a stop work order, and then they had to go back and get another area variance. So that sign actually received 2 area variances
But so then,
for
I guess,
installation.
kind of back up, or I guess amend the point I was trying to make. It would be, you know, understood that they understand the area variance process, they understand kind of what types of signs are conforming and not conforming. They've basically come into contact with the city's zone, you know, signage regulations, you know, on more than one occasion. So I think that they would have a relatively clear understanding of how, the city treats signs, and would be able to understand the signage regulations in the MU1 code if they were to review it, basically. So does anybody, I guess we can I wanted to kind of go around the room and go through each criteria. I didn't, you know, just to get everyone's input on it. I do, like I said, I do have a letter prepared, but I don't want to kind of spend like 15 minutes reading it without letting everyone else speak first. So why don't we start on the left side of the room? So I guess the first thing we want to look at is the impact of the proposed variance, on the zoning district. And so I guess the question would be, what does granting this area variance mean for future, on the ability to regulate signage in the downtown? And also, would this mean for future area variances of a similar kind? I guess anyone can chime in. We can start with Dr. Mikuchi.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity, and I guess this might just be my novice, because I haven't been on a commission very long, but how many variance applications of this type do we get specifically for signage? Are there a lot of places downtown that are attempting to install large or LED signage?
No, this is one of, so, again, like I said, the Foothills was an exception because it wasn't LED, but it was size. Under the new ordinance, this is the first one.
Okay.
Under the old ordinance, there were a couple, and they were mostly, it was like the Foothills was one of them, and the billboard. I think,
76 Main.
yeah, I can't think of any that were, other than that were specifically, because they were significantly larger than what the zoning code would permit. The Green Earth had to get a variance, but it was mostly due to the number of signs and their
Okay.
placement on the building, but that was under the old code.
Anyone else?
I have a question.
Sure.
Stephen?
Yep.
For an area variance, does the state give guidelines on, threshold that you have to meet to grant a variance for this type of variance?
Yeah, so the thing with an area variance and that's part of what the zoning board will be reviewing. Area variances are intentionally a lower threshold than a use variance. A use variance, you have to meet all the criteria. An area variance is much more subjective, so the board has a wider, they just have to show that they've actually weighed the impacts of those standards. It's not like a use variance where there's specific criteria that you have to meet all of. An area variance, it's much more like nuanced. So it's not like you have to meet each one of these or you're not approved.
It's a balancing
It's a
act.
balancing act.
Yeah. And then again, I think like, you know, it's also important to remember that, ZBAs can't deviate from prior decisions with similar facts. So we also have to be mindful of the facts underlying this area variance application. So for example, you know, if Latte Lounge wants to do the same thing basically and say, we're going to change our sign to LED, but use the existing frame and then apply for an area variance after the fact. You know, they could say, well, you gave 189 Main an area variance and we thought we could install and ask for it too. You know, you could say the facts are substantially similar. It's an LED sign installed within the realm of like a, you know, I guess a sign frame. We didn't know that we needed a sign permit. You know, and then the ZBA, it would be hard. They'd have to say why, have a reasonable kind of finding that there's like different facts underlying the area variance application, or have a substantial rationale for deviating from their decision. So in some cases, they do set precedent, but it's non-binding, and it gives them ways to get out of prior decisions. So I think, you know, that's one thing to consider.
So in other words, you're saying that here, right now, in this conversation, we're kind of setting a precedent for the level of acceptance of signage that can go potentially onto Main Street if we are to be in support
I mean,
of.
in a way, I mean, our correspondence would be entered into the record, and, you know, it wouldn't be binding to us, but, you know, a future applicant could look at what we reviewed and say, hey, you guys really didn't look so hard at the other ones. It's not fair. You're treating me unfairly. I mean, they could say that, but again, because this has little bearing, they can't, like, you know, sue us over this, for example, but, you know, this is our first time, so we would be creating kind of a paper trail or a non-binding precedent, as you say.
But we're not voting on this. We're not approving or denying.
You
So I
don't-
don't think we're really setting a precedence because we're not
Right.
approving or denying. We're just kind of having a discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, Stephen, I have a question for you. I mean, how many applicants on Main Street or in this district have actually gone from like a wooden sign, like his example, like Latte Lounge, to an LED or vice versa? I mean, I've been on Main Street my whole life. I don't really see that.
Well, no, there haven't been.
No.
And that's why the code was written to not permit new ones from being built. I mean, the intent of the code was.
So the code's now in place to avoid this.
Yeah, the code was made because we identified the types of signs on Main Street. We looked at what was on Main Street. We found signs we liked. So we looked at properties like the Green Toad, the Latte Lounge, some of the DRI guidelines. And one of the goals in the comprehensive plan was to codify those DRI guidelines. So we looked at frontages we liked, and we said, okay, these are the size, location, types, this is what we want to keep. And we said all the other stuff we kind of want to phase out.
So but from that explanation, Chair, I think that means that we're not setting a precedent by Chair, because now we already have this in place, so it's not like everybody on Main Street can say, oh, you know what, they did it, I wanna do it, I can do it without, you know, because now we have a code already established, right, Stephen?
I think, well, from our review, it would be, you know, we'd be having a paper trail. We don't set a binding precedent, but for an area variance application, we would be, for our future area variances. But again, as I said before, it's not binding for uncertain circumstances. So like, you know, it would be like an evolution of thought, right? So like, it's like a newspaper, you know, we're making a series of arguments, and here we have like a correspondence, and then it would kind of, I don't know, maybe set a standard for what we're looking at and how we view this part and how we proceed through it. Maybe it wouldn't, precedent's not the right word, but we'd be kind of establishing a written paper trail record of what we're doing.
And what would happen is if tomorrow we said, let's write a code that allows LED signs, because we sat around and we talked about it at the planning commission and we said it'd be a good idea, we could then use this to justify why we changed the ordinance, or why we advised the council to change the ordinance. So I mean, what it's supposed to do is it's supposed to create a written document that justifies what we're doing, and it also communicates to the ZBA what the city's legislative intent is when we write these ordinances and pass them.
And I think, you know, again, when it comes to granting variances, they run with the land. So each time we grant a variance or an exception to the zoning code for a particular property, it becomes, you know, they get kind of relief from it, so it becomes harder to regulate signs. And I think, you know, considering that, you know, downtown Oneonta is, you know, has state recognition as an important historic district. It's on the National Register of Historic Places. You know, regulating signage in this case is important, and hence the development of the form-based code. So I guess kind of what would folks think would be the impact, or if any, of granting, you know, the variance on the zoning district? Would there be any impact? Would there not be any impact? Well, if so, what would the impact be?
Well, really though, I think my question is really what would the impact be if we deny this variance and we decide collectively, hypothetically as a group, that we don't, you know, we do wanna continue this regulation with these signs, then what happens from then on?
Sure, so I guess, I think kind of my concern, you know, is basically twofold. This would represent, you know, the third time the applicant's gone for a variance, twice under the previous code and the third time under this code. I think both times, were there written decisions as to why the ZBA gave them a variance? No. So I think it becomes hard to understand the specific circumstances of each variance application without written decisions. So that, you know, that's a challenge. I guess kind of the more variances we issue, the further it undermines the ability to regulate signage. So it calls into question, my answer would be, the first answer would be, it calls into question the whole signage section. In that if we keep granting variances, it inches us closer to the point of asking the question, do we need to update the signage regulations downtown more broadly? Or are the signage regulations downtown, in this case, since this is the first one, are the downtown signage regulations working for us? So the way in the correspondence I'd prepared, I said it kind of erodes it. It's like a gradual erosion. It's like waves lapping on a shore, eventually kind of undermining the ability to regulate signs. And I think that in the code itself, it places a strong emphasis on preserving historic signs and having a very clean architectural scheme that stays true to the city's historic character. I guess the second, answer that I would have is that it, kind of sets a dangerous precedent for future area variance applications, because the applicant, I would find that they're reasonably aware of the zoning code. They have a reasonable understanding of the zoning code. They profess to have a reasonable understanding of the zoning code on more than one occasion. And they chose, to build the sign first and ask for permission after the fact. And I think that this would adversely affect other law-abiding business owners who choose to comply with the signage regulations and come before the commission, come before Steve with the sign permit application. And if they need site plan approval, they would come before us as a planning commission. So if others, other applicants see that they can get away with this or get a variance, they could essentially ostensibly follow the same path and then make a claim that, 189 Main or DC Marketing did this, why can't I do it? And then the ZBA would be forced to kind of, determine otherwise or agree with that.
The historical argument doesn't really hold in this case, because even if they didn't do that, the sign didn't have any historic value anyway.
Well, that's one of the arguments.
It's just, it was a 189 that was lit up. It's just, the difference is is the whole issue with LED, I guess.
Well, so a new sign, if he would have applied for a sign permit,
Right.
we'd be like, it doesn't meet the intent of the code, which is to maintain the historic nature of downtown.
And there are several provisions of the code get to.
Yeah, but I guess what happens if you're replacing a sign that has no impact on the, you know, in other words, before that, there was no historical value to the sign.
Well, the previous sign might not have been historical, but the new sign detracts from the historical preserved downtown as it was
Okay.
meant to be.
Okay,
Yeah, so
all
like.
right, that makes sense.
So like this would be, you know, the previous sign clashed with the historic nature of downtown, but the applicant increased the degree of nonconformity.
Okay.
You know,
No, that makes sense.
Dr. Mikuchi is totally right.
Excuse me, Chair.
Sure.
I've got one more question. We just voted in a Landmarks and Historic Preservation Commission last night. Stephen, can you refresh my memory on, will this have any impact on any future?
Yeah, so,
issues?
so anything now, once the Historic Review Board, the Landmark Commission, once we establish local districts, which obviously,
Well, that was in one, that's why I'm asking.
so
Oh, we haven't established it.
we haven't established as a local, yeah. So in the future, if a sign permit were to come in for like an LED sign, the first place it would go to is the Architectural Review Board. They would be making a determination on it, whether it met the standards of our historic preservation ordinance.
So what's the timeline on establishing a local historic?
They make a recommendation to council, and the council votes it in.
I think we need to get on that.
That was why I wrote the ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, so this would, again, you know, and then granting an area variance would essentially set them back too, in theory, right? Because, well, but it would maybe not set them back, but it would, you know, kind of.
Yeah, the unfortunate part is until you have a local ordinance or a local district established, that review board cannot function. So the first function of business for them will be having their first meeting, establishing those historic districts, and then the ordinance can be enforced.
So maybe not yet, but it would kind of like, I guess I would feel like we'd be doing them a disservice if we were like, hey, there's no impact to the historic district.
I guess I misunderstood then, Stephen. So
Yep.
the commission, the Preservation Commission, has to establish the local district and then recommend it to the council. for the
And then you
council
have to
accept it.
approve it.
Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was one of the, there's two models. You can either have a historic district or a historic board that has the authority to do that on their own, or it has to go through the legislative body. And we opted to go through the legislative
Right.
body to kind of massage some concerns about a rabid historic review board.
Like Cooperstown.
Something.
So, I think, okay, so are there any further discussion on item 1? We can move to item 2.
Sure.
So, item 2, asks whether the variance meets the intent of the form-based code in the City of Oneonta Comprehensive Plan, 2019 Comp Plan. We started with Dr. Mikuchi last time. Why don't we go on the other side and start with Commissioner Baskin?
I guess, yeah, my concern is, to kind of echo with everybody here about like creating like a new path for people to do this, but it seems like it's a pretty rare instance that people actually try to pursue this. So, in terms of how it's gonna affect, Main Street, it's hard to say, I don't really know.
I think that, you know, it's tricky. I think like, you know, the likelihood of, you know, another business owner doing that's very small. But, you know, the path exists. It's not like I'm gonna spend $50,000 on LED sign tomorrow and like, you know, give it to somebody, having to say, look, we can, you know, if the ZBA gives the variance, we can do it too. We're not, you know, that's not gonna happen. Commissioner Maskin, what do you think?
Well, I mean, there are a couple, I just wonder, does it make sense, and maybe this is going off the topic a little bit, but, you know, would it help if there was an ordinance about LED signs? We don't really, there is?
There is.
Yeah.
Specifically
Okay.
prohibited.
Now there is.
Now there is,
Now
okay.
there is.
And, because I remember a few years ago, we had this discussion. Yeah. Okay, never mind.
Yeah, we actually, out of the discussion that was had at the planning commission, we included a restriction on LED
Okay.
signage in the downtown code.
And that was split.
Chalked it up to.
And that was split. So the planning commission at the time was split on how we should handle LED signs. It was real.
When was
Okay.
that, do you remember?
2020.
2021, something
Yeah,
like that. Right,
probably
it was
late
probably
2021.
before, it went before the council for adoption, when the planning commission was reviewing.
It's a hot session.
The, Commissioner Canino?
I kind of agree like with Sam, like I feel like, you know, maybe it's because I've been on Main Street my whole life. I don't really see, and he's a business owner too, I just don't see business owners doing things, you know, property owners, doing something like that just off the cuff. It is expensive, you're right, you just, you know, we don't know how much, but I've looked at signage and it is, it's, yeah, it's a big, it's a big chunk of change. So, I mean, I don't think that, we're gonna have a problem with people coming left and right with something. And I don't really think that a lot of our business owners would do this, I don't really, and because like Dan said, it's been up there, and like I said that at the last meeting, it's been up there forever and ever and ever. To me, I don't really feel like it really does change anything, cause it's always been there. If it was never there, and then all of a sudden you put it up, I'm like, whoa. But being that it's been there for 50-something, I mean, I think it's been like that long. Do you know when it originally was up there? I think I asked that question last time.
Yeah, it's been there since at least probably the 70s, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
LED
since the
technology
key,
was
the old key
Yeah,
bank used to
so-
be.
Well,
So-
that's the thing, the sign has increasingly been altered,
Right.
and we don't have a record of that. So this is the first time where the code office has been like, we need a record of the alteration you're doing, because we have a zoning ordinance. So yeah, that's kind of what we lack a lot of information on that building.
I guess my feeling is that if there was not a sign there and then they put one up, I'd be like, hey, that's not right. But being that the sign's been there 50 years or whatever, it just kind of feels like it should stay there because it's been there. It might have changed a little bit, but yeah, I'm kind of going along with like what these guys are thinking.
Sure. So, kind of my perspective, I guess I should go to Dr. Mikuchi first before going to me. Why don't we go to Dr. Mikuchi?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. I'm less concerned with the sign that's already there because as we've all already agreed, it's already done and it's there. My concern is that people will look at that sign, not to say that there are a lot of businesses that want these ugly LED signs all over downtown or Main Street, but I think that people will look at that and be like, oh, but I could do that if I wanted to, and I would literally dread the sight of multiple LED signs on Main Street. So for me, I think it's less maybe about the sign itself, which we, can't do too much about now, but really for us setting a non-binding precedent in this room to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen.
Thank you, Dr. Mikuchi. I'm kind of in agreement with you, but I kind of wanted to reference a couple specific points in the zoning code, and then the comp plan too. So first off, part 6, subpart 1, sections A, C, F, and G of the MU1 form-based code, clearly outline the intent of the signage regulations, which, aims to preserve the historical character of the MU1 district while preventing the installation of signs that could damage or detract from the city's historical fabric. So they reference the Secretary of the Interior's standards for historic preservation. They place a strong emphasis on implementing signage that is in tune with the with the reasons why the historic district was established in the first place, but also the historic nature of the building. So we're not necessarily the sign itself, but 189 Main as a historic structure on its own. And so the other piece of determining whether or not it's consistent with the form-based code is simply that it's prohibited. That on its face makes it inconsistent with the city's zoning code because prohibited uses are deemed to not be in character with the, the district in which the zoning regulations pertain, or I guess in this case, the transect in which, these signage regulations pertain. So I think, the comprehensive plan is a little bit more debatable because, folks could debate what it means to be business friendly. So kind of my perspective of what it means to be business friendly, is that being business friendly is preserving a historic downtown that relies on its charm and character to attract residents and visitors and protect the investments made by folks looking to get their businesses off the ground and create a strong, vibrant downtown. This was effectuated in multiple economic development plans for Main Street and the 2017 City of Oneonta DRI in round one, which called for design standards. There are specific recommendations which emphasize the importance of historic preservation, specifically quality of life recommendation number 12 and quality of life recommendation number 13. And also the comprehensive plan clearly calls for the implementation of design standards and by extension a form-based code. I think the form-based code was like a recommended implementation action. So I think, like, in my opinion, what it means to be business friendly is to have a clear and strong form-based code which regulates development in a fair and objective way, and while preserving the city's historic character. And then, in my opinion, increasing the degree of a non-conforming use, in this case the sign, detracts heavily from that and is therefore inconsistent with the comp plan. That's just kind of my perspective. And that's kind of what is in the comp plan. Again, but I think like I said, those recommendations are pretty clear, but the only one that would be debatable is what it means to be business friendly, because business friendly, it could mean like, oh, let him, do what he wants, but also business friendly could mean we want to preserve the historic downtown because we want folks to come down. You can look at it in many different ways, admittedly. What if the folks have any comments about that?
So what's the next step? You write a letter to the zoning board?
I have a letter
Okay.
drafted, but I wanted to get input from everybody and have, make everybody's voice heard. I didn't wanna super everybody and just be like, here's a letter, So I guess the kind of third criteria that we're looking at is whether or not the applicant has sought relief through all means provided by the code. And I guess, Steve, you can chime in if I'm wrong here, but what I understand this to mean is the degree to which they've worked with your office to implement a conforming sign. And, they couldn't do that because they already built the sign first and then came to Steve. So it's not like, he could take it down and put in a conforming sign or, so essentially, in my opinion, that, it was essentially impossible for them to do that because they'd already built it before applying for the permit.
Right.
And also that, again, in the application and kind of the record in front of us, we don't have any evidence that there was a good faith effort made to comply with the signage regulations, because by installing the sign first, they immediately didn't, obviated that. So that kind of, in my opinion, the third criteria basically is that they, did not.
Yeah, I mean, the simplest way to make the sign conforming would have been to just replace the LED section with LED section.
It would have been to do an in-kind
Yeah,
replacement.
that's a repair.
Or keep the existing sign, and then therefore they wouldn't need a variance, but they didn't do that.
Correct.
But the sign was already non-conforming prior to the updates that they made to it?
The sign was non-conforming in size and location,
Okay.
even under the old code.
Mm-hmm.
The new code added a level of non-conformity, which was the LED.
Right.
So this sign is non-conforming not only in the fact that it's LED, but it's also non-conforming in its size, its location. It was engaging in off-site advertising, which was not permitted under the old code. So you kind of have like the multi-factor of
Yeah.
it's in no way compliant.
Is the size because it was sort of grandfathered in because it's been there so long?
Right, so it's been there long enough that it was grandfathered under the old code. So the old code grandfathered the size, the location, the off-site advertising, all the stuff that was going on there that wasn't LED. So now what we've done is we have a sign that is now non-conforming in all those ways, and now also,
It's because they had taken it out and then put it back. So
Right.
essentially, by the action of replacing the old sign or taking it out,
sign facing.
with the sign facing, they essentially trigger all those requirements. Yes, Councilman Risberger.
I don't have a vote here, I know, but the thing that's bothering me about this is that, when I moved here 20 years ago, I mean, it was shortly after that, we were starting to work on the Brzee building and change the facade, and the whole purpose was to bring back the historic nature of our downtown Main Street and preserve it. And then we had the DRI that talked about preserving the nature of downtown, and the new form-based code, which is huge, was set up to help preserve the historic nature of downtown, and it's a historic district. And I realize there's been a sign there forever, but for me, it's not the issue about there being a sign there, it's the fact that it was changed significantly from a sign with an animation, this big, to suddenly this big. And it just flies in the face of all the work we've done in the last 20 years. And I do think, I do think this is a slippery slope of what can happen. I mean, we're saying that nobody else will do this now because of cost, and I don't disagree with that. But we all know that technology, the cost of technology decreases and it gets easier, and I think it sets a precedent for other businesses looking at that, like you said, saying, it's like, you know what, that looks kind of cool. I think I could do this. Maybe not now, maybe not tomorrow, but in 5 years, 10 years. And if we're not careful, I think of what's happened in some of our neighborhoods with the different variances we've had, that it's not just one, then it becomes 2, and then 3, and then 4, and before you know it, you've got a section of a neighborhood gone. So I know it's a different part of the code, but I can't help but looking at that, it's the same thing. So I think we need to, and again, I know we're not going to be, you guys are not going to be the ones issuing this variance if it's going to be issued at all, but I don't think it's as simple as it's just another sign, it's just a replacement of what we have. I think it's very, very different than what's been there for the last 50 years. So.
If I could just say too, and this is just my personal perspective, but that sign also now when you're driving down Main Street from Elm, also completely blocks the Historical Society now, and you can barely even see our signage that lies behind it. And we made sure that our signage was exactly what it should have been. So I think it does kind of fly in the face of not only the code, but also, that to me wouldn't actually even be considered to be business friendly. If you are potentially overshadowing historical nonprofit organizations that stand behind your business. Just throwing that out there.
Thank you. Your thoughts?
I guess the other one is it's just sort of the whole notion, and I know that we had this discussion earlier about somebody going ahead and doing something and then essentially getting caught and then going, oops,
Yeah. Asking for
and how do you
forgiveness instead of permission.
Yeah, and how do you sort of, I don't know how you would get a handle on that, but, and I'm not sure with this particular sign how big a precedent that would be setting, but, it is setting a precedent.
Kind of the way I see it with a particular applicant is this is the third strike, basic third variance application. So, again, it kind of goes back to, do they understand kind of the city's approach to regulating signage? I would argue that they do. Do they understand zoning? I would argue that they do, based on their own statements and decisions to adopt zoning codes. And then I guess I would say they're in the sign business, so they understand signage. So I think it's, record's pretty clear. I guess kind of what I wanted to do was to, because of open meetings law, I didn't want to kind of share correspondence outside of a public meeting, so I kind of now, by nature being transparent, I'd like to read kind of the correspondence that I drafted. If we want, if people are okay with it, we can send it to the ZBA as our public comment. If people can request revisions, I'd like to do so kind of now, and then send, at the end, and vote on condition of sending it, so that way we don't hold up the applicant for another month. Are folks okay with that? It's not long.
Fire away.
I was gonna say it's not long, it's only 15 pages.
Oh, okay.
I'm just kidding. Okay, so.
That's all?
Yeah, I
Oh,
know. Well,
okay.
to me, it's short, right? So, all right, so it says, Dear Chairman Tamino, as Chair of the City of Oneonta's Planning Commission, I'm writing to inform you that we have completed our review of the area variance application for the installation of a light emitting diode or LED sign by DC Marketing, hereinafter referred to as the applicant, at 189 Main Street, tax map number 300.23-7-2. According to the 2022 form-based zoning code for the MU1 district, our role as Planning Commission is to provide a written statement of facts to the ZBA addressing the criteria established in Part 1, Variance and Zoning Interpretation, subsection 2 for all variance applications. In particular, our review focused on the following points: the impact of the proposed variance or interpretation on the zoning district. 2, the variance or if the variance or interpretation meets the intent of the form-based code and the 2019 City of Oneonta Comprehensive Plan. 3, if the applicant has sought relief through all means provided by this code. Regarding the first point, the applicant removed the existing sign at 189 Main Street that contained a small LED display and replaced it with a new sign that contained a substantially larger LED display. The MU1 Form-Based Code Part 6, Subpart 1 states, quote, "It shall be unlawful for any person, firm, or corporation to erect, alter, or relocate any sign within the City of Oneonta without first obtaining a sign permit, unless the sign is specifically exempt from the permit requirements outlined by this code," end quote. Although Part 6, Subpart 2 provides exceptions to the requirements for a sign permit, our review found that the applicant's project does not qualify for any of the exceptions that would exempt the applicant from submitting a sign permit application. The applicant applied for a sign permit and received a denial in writing, which specifically outlined key deficiencies in the application. The applicant requested that the City of Oneonta attorney provide a second opinion. The city attorney confirmed the finding of the City of Oneonta code enforcement officer. Secondly, the applicant's LED sign does not conform to the MU1 form-based code signage regulations. Specifically, video, LCD, LED, or other digitally created or produced signs are not allowed in the MU1 district. Additionally, Part 300-19A of the City of Oneonta zoning code states that off-premises signs are not permitted in any district. The applicant allows area businesses to use the sign at 189 Main Street to advertise their products and services in violation of the above-mentioned part. The City of Oneonta informed the applicant in writing that the LED sign was in violation of the MU1 form-based code signage requirements. The city was unaware that the applicant was proceeding with the installation of the sign until it was in the process of being installed. Despite the denial of the sign permit application receiving a written notice of violation, the applicant chose to install the sign anyway. He actually installed it before, so that's not correct, so I'll have to revise that. Our review found that the applicant had a reasonable understanding of the City of Oneonta's requirements for signage in the MU1 district. As a member of the City of Oneonta's Common Council, the applicant reviewed the 2022 MU1 form-based code and voted to adopt it. The applicant has applied for and received 2 area variances for a sign located at 24 Market Street and 76 Main Street in the City of Oneonta. In each instance, the granting of an area variance undermined the city's ability to regulate signage in the MU1 district. Issuing a third area variance for the sign at 189 Main Street would further erode the city's ability to regulate signage in its historic downtown. Granting an area variance to an applicant who is not only aware of the MU1 district signage requirements but chose not to follow them would create a dangerous precedent and potentially encourage similar area variance applications in the future. It would essentially promote a build first and ask for forgiveness culture. This would adversely affect law-abiding business owners who comply with the approval process outlined in the MU1 form-based code and the City of Oneonta's zoning code. As part of our review process, the Planning Commission evaluated the application's consistency with the 2022 MU1 form-based code and the 2019 City of Oneonta's comprehensive plan. After careful consideration, the Commission has concluded that the application fails to meet the intent of the MU1 form-based code for several reasons. The primary reason for this determination is that the proposed LED sign at 189 Main Street is explicitly prohibited under the MU1 form-based code, rendering it inconsistent with the code's purpose. As a result, the proposed sign will not comply with the regulations set forth in the code. Additionally, Part 6, Subpart 1, subsections A, C, F, and G of the MU1 form-based code outlined the intent of signage regulations, which aims to preserve the historical character of the MU1 district while preventing the installation of signs that could damage or detract from the city's historical fabric. Moreover, Part 5 of the MU1 form-based code specifies that the code mirrors the Secretary of Interior's standards for treatment of historic properties with respect to work done on nationally listed or contributing buildings. Given that the downtown Oneonta Historic District is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, this is particularly relevant. The Planning Commission has determined that the application is not in line with the goals and objectives outlined in the 2019 Comprehensive Plan. The city's vision statement, specifically item 3, aims to foster a business-friendly environment within the city, which is further supported by strategy economic development number 4. Additionally, recommendations in quality of life, recommendation number 12 and 13 emphasize the importance of historic preservation and promotion of the city's historic districts. The implementation of design standards in a form-based code are also recommended in recommendations D9 and AG6. I forgot what it stands for. These recommendations demonstrate that the city envisions a bustling downtown that utilizes its historical buildings and character to attract a diverse mix of businesses, residents, and attractions. By implementing a form-based code with robust design standards, the city can protect investments made by the business community while preserving the historic charm of downtown Oneonta. However, the installation of an LED sign in the midst of the city's downtown historic district, city's historic downtown goes against these protections and undermines the regulatory measures in place to manage development. Furthermore, the Planning Commission has found that the applicant did not exhaust all means of relief provided through this code. The application presented to the Planning Commission did not include any evidence of a good faith effort to seek relief provided through the code prior to installing the sign. Instead, the applicant installed the sign and is now seeking relief from the ME1 form-based code after the fact. In light of these findings, the Planning Commission strongly recommends that the ZBA consider the information presented in this communication when deciding on the applicant's area variance application. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Danny Lappin, Chairman of the City of Oneonta Planning Commission.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
Okay, I know, cause we talked about it last month, and so I'm just trying to remember. So did the city give him, the applicant, a written, cause you mentioned that the application was denied and the city gave them, the applicant, written denial and a written violation. You mentioned that. I don't remember if we talked about that.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
confirmed. And then your comment about the attorney, I don't remember us getting that information.
We discussed at this meeting just now.
Yeah, so Lynn requested that Dave Merzig also look at his application.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Dave Merzig is in agreement that this requires an area variance.
He's in agreement with it, right, I just didn't know because you put that in there and I wasn't aware of that, so I just wasn't comfortable with that first because I didn't know that about that.
Yeah.
I didn't know, where, okay. And then, 189, 24 Market, which one's 24 Market?
Foothills.
Oh, but that's different, that's from size.
Yeah, it's
And then
different.
what was the 76
It's the billboard.
above, by the karate, that's not
Right
karate
up the
dojo.
viaduct.
That's
The
like
karate.
right above,
And that one
Legends.
was size.
That's a
So
Legends.
those two are on about size, not on the LED.
Oh, yeah, so initially I had it, no, I had,
I just remember that the last meeting, and I know Dan and Marcel wasn't here, but I just remember at the last meeting, we talked about keeping it, like you said, there's a slippery slope in everything, so I just, some of that information, I just wanna make sure that information is,
Yeah.
accurate, and if it's necessary, cause I didn't know if that
sure,
was.
so I struck initially I had the sign at 24 Market as an LED sign because I thought it was not.
Oh, okay.
But I had struck that, I caught that, so I didn't mention it when I was reading.
Oh, I thought you did, I wrote it down.
No, I didn't say like 24, I said that 24 Market was LED, but that, was incorrect. So,
Okay.
That's not why they got the variance, but.
But you mentioned the two previous granted area variances for signs in downtown.
Correct, yeah, but either way, the point I was making in that paragraph was that, this would be the third area variance, I think it's third attempt to seek relief from the signage regulations in general, twice under the previous code and once under this code. I can make that distinction more.
Did he ask for relief on those other two?
Yeah, they required area variances.
Oh,
So the foothills sign
Because of
required an area
size.
variance because of size.
right.
Also because of how it was placed on the building. There's a whole, I mean, we can look at the old application, but it was an area variance for size for sure. And then the billboard was, originally was gonna be a digital sign, and then it changed back to a static sign, and it still required a variance because it was an alteration of an existing non-conforming sign. There was also specific, that sign had received a variance in like 1992 or 96 or something, that specifically allowed it to be there, but it's had to have specific city-sponsored advertisement on it. There was a whole thing, and then, so yeah. That sign has a long history of variances.
I feel like all signs have a long.
It's been varianced into existence. Now it's a new one.
So I have a couple
Continue going.
revisions. There was other, there was one other piece that was in my correspondence that was not correct, which was that the applicant installed the sign first and the city became aware of it afterwards. So that paragraph where I was talking about informing the applicant in writing, I would change it to be, I'd add the first sentence would be to say that the applicant installed the sign, and then the city of Oneonta informed the applicant that in writing that it was a violation afterwards. So I just have to kind of move that last sentence up to the first sentence, basically,
Right.
and change that. Thoughts?
I think that's fair to me.
Yeah.
I agree with what
Do
you.
we need a
Yeah.
vote to share the second? Shall we, okay, I'll entertain a motion to, I guess, for the commission to authorize me as the chair to send this, I guess via email to Chairman Tamina of the ZBA. Motion made by, Commissioner McCucci. Is it Commissioner McCucci or Dr. McCucci? Which do you?
Whatever you want.
I like Dr. McCucci. It sounds better.
Commissioner Dodd. I'll second that.
Seconded by Commissioner Maskin. Any further discussion?
So, if you are okay with the sign, I'm just asking this question, it's been a while. So if I say no, it's because I'm okay with the sign? Or,
If you say no, you're saying no to authorizing him to send a letter.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's kind,
You don't
Your
actually make
reasons
the
are your
decision about the
reasons.
sign.
I know, but I'm
Yeah.
saying if I say, I mean, you're gonna send the letter anyways, doesn't matter, because
well, I mean,
the letter's gotta be
if
sent.
it was voted down,
The le-
then we would have to
Review
agree
it,
on a set
I
of
see
facts
what
that
you,
we-
I mean, you have to submit a letter, so
Yeah.
I'm just not, okay, alright, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, you can vote no. I mean, again, like I'll say personally, I don't like the sign. I don't like it, but it's not something that I would say, this is horrible, it needs to come down now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I mean, I'm kinda indifferent, I'll be honest with you. It's not like, I don't love it, but I don't hate it.
Yeah, I'm the
you
same-
know?
I'm the
And I
same
think it's
way.
cause I'm just, like we talked, because I'm just used to it, but I understand, okay. Okay.
Any further discussion?
Mm.
Clerk, please call roll.
Chair Lappin,
Yes.
Commissioner Maskin,
Yes.
Commissioner Baskin,
Yes.
Commissioner Makucci,
Yes.
Commissioner Tomino,
No.
passes.
If we're in agreement 100% of the time, we'd be doing something wrong.
No, right.
Okay, so I will make those revisions and I'll
Are
send.
you gonna email
I'll
everybody
include,
information?
I'll include everybody on the email, so just so we're clear, I was gonna address kind of the two factual errors in the letter
The
that.
correction, I guess, so you can just review it, okay.
And then I'll send it to, the ZBA and to the planning commission, I'll CC everybody.
Okay.
Along with Stephen, so they know. Okay, so next on the agenda, is the, U-zone amendments. Can we keep these?
Yeah,
Cool.
I don't want them back.
I was too lazy to print them in color at home, and I was like, I don't know if I should print them at work in color, but. So, for this, has everybody had a chance to review the zone amendments?
Not completely, I'm gonna be honest.
Yeah, same
Not
here.
as much as I would have liked to, but.
Yeah,
So, I think, and then that's all right, so I think, my understanding of why, this was brought to us was that, Steve, you felt more comfortable, given that the planning commission has expertise in seeker reviews, and that we've completed them in detail in the past and survived legal challenge on multiple occasions, that the planning commission act as lead agency in the seeker review of this zoning code amendment. And so, by doing so, we would have plenty of time to review, at least 1 month, if not more, to review the code in more detail. So, just so for the new edification of the public and newer folks, legislative changes or zoning changes to, large tracts of land, triggers, I guess would trigger an environmental review because the Common Council, using their discretion as legislators, would need to vote to adopt this. That vote, I guess that kind of decision-making process triggers the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act. The Environmental Quality Review Act needs to be completed before it goes to council in this case. And by completion, either it means that in the event that this is classified as a type 1 action, which it is, we would need to complete a negative declaration or submit a draft environmental impact statement to the Department of Environmental Conservation for their review, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so, in this case, this is a type 1 action, but I guess what we would need to do first is to declare our intent to be lead agency under seeker. Is this something that, I guess we can do that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was the intent.
Yeah.
I
Great.
don't know, Greg, is that what you've taken from the council?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean,
So part of declaring our intent to be lead agency, it involves sending written correspondence to the Department of Environmental Conservation and SHPO and other involved agencies or interested agencies that we intend to do this, like Otsego County, for example, Town of Oneonta, et cetera. That we, being given our position in the city, and this is a city zoning district and city legislative change, that we feel most qualified to review this, and generally that correspondence, the state, I guess the interested agencies would have 30 days to respond to us, and then at next month's meeting, we could proceed with classifying the action under seeker. And
What's the chances that another agency would want this?
almost zero. I mean, I
Well,
think,
we know the count.
I think in some cases, like, you've had like intermunicipal projects that like traverse a border, and most of it's in the city, but part of it's in the town, and sometimes like the town would be like, I hate you, city, I wanna declare, we don't think you could do secret reviews, we'll wanna be the agency, but that doesn't really apply to us here. But it's really rare, in more developed areas with like bigger projects, maybe.
So would we find out before our meeting? Cause what if we weren't lead agency? If they say, okay, yeah, next month we come like, oh, guess what, you're the lead agency, now we're gonna do the seeker. But so will we know ahead of time so we can prepare?
I think we could.
Or do we have to prepare and then just be ready for it?
We've completed this, Steve's completed the part 1 of the environmental assessment form. We could give them 30 calendar days to respond to us with any objections. If we hear none, we just assume that there are none. And we proceed with being lead agency, and we classify the action under seeker. And then we would review, at that time, we would review part 1 of the EAF and then proceed with part 2 and part 3, which would involve issuing a seeker determination at that time. And it's really, it's not, I think, like, in some cases zoning changes, the zone changes, we'd have to look at this compared to the old U zone and MU2 district regulations and think about how the environment would be affected if this zoning code were to come into effect. So we would say like, okay, if development occurred as contemplated under this code, would we have a positive impact on significant impact on the environment, or would there be no impact on the environment as a whole? You have to contemplate that. Generally, legislative actions don't, adversely impact the environment, just on their own, but, they do you know, the zoning codes and comprehensive plans by extension contemplate future growth scenarios. So we would have to look at it and kind of see, you know, if this type of growth contemplated under the code would have, you know, significant environmental impact or not. That's kind of what we'd be looking for when we review this. So that sounds good. Just take a look at this, come, you know, back next month.
30 days is
there-
after your next meeting date.
Well, so what I was gonna say is, if we hear back, I mean, we've already heard back from the county.
Yeah.
The county's already been like, I mean, I've already sent it to the town. The town is
Good one.
ambivalent. I guess we'd send it to DEC and SHPO, but,
Day one.
yeah.
Yeah, I guess I think I jump in, what other potentially interested agencies would there be?
I think
It's
like,
not- It's in the city entirely, obviously, it's not. in
I
and of
think
itself.
like, we can't, and then SUNY Oneonta is exempt from our land use restrictions anyway, being state property, right?
Right.
So I don't think there would be any other than DEC and SHPO. You know, this is not, you're not really dealing with infrastructure, so Department of Health wouldn't be. There's no, state road, I don't think, in the, U-zone, right? So DOT wouldn't be.
Correct.
So I think maybe just DEC and SHPO. I think we can kind of proceed, you know, if we hear anything, I guess we'd ask that, you know, Steve or Greg, you notify us that the agency objects. If not, we can just proceed at our next month. Maybe? Or should we wait till June? What do you think?
Yeah, I'm gonna say that we should probably, if we hear back, have a special meeting.
Yeah, okay, we can do that.
So we could schedule a different meeting date for May.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that with
The 19th in consideration, so, Tuesday, the 23rd, I can do a 7 o'clock.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll
Okay.
send those notifications out immediately and then see what we hear back.
And then we'll set up a special meeting for the 23rd. If folks can't make it, shoot me an email.
Yes, sir.
Which day? 23rd?
Tuesday, the
Tuesday.
23rd at 7 o'clock.
I will have to let you know. Is that gonna be a meeting to, like, do this, to do it up, to do this? Okay.
So we would, ideally, you know, so what we would be doing when we, you know, when Commissioner Tamino mentions, completing a seeker review. So I think like, you know, just for ease, seeker's like a big bucket where it's like a thought exercise where there are 3 sets of forms that ask us progressively more specific questions about whether or not a project will have a, you know, significant negative impact on the environment. And at the meeting, we'll have done that kind of first initial due diligence that's usually done on the computer. And then we'll go through those more specific questions one by one. And then we'll come up with what's known as a seeker determination, whereby we review each kind of environmental criteria and explain why we think that there will or will not be negative environmental impact. And it's important to say why, because as we saw with the Loss on Dietz Street lawsuit, people are watching. So. And as we've seen in the correspondence I sent earlier, you know, there was already, you know, a threat of litigation over over the U-zone amendments, so we're exercising, you know, discretion and due diligence in our review is important.
Danny, just so I'm clear here, we're looking to be lead, you guys are looking to be lead agency, but you're reaching out to which 2 groups again?
The Department of Environmental Conservation and the State Historic Preservation Office.
We've already sent, so I already sent the completed 239N and the county's already responded back that it has no intermunicipal, as far as they're concerned, there.
Did you send it to me? Or to everybody?
Yeah, I sent it to the group. It's been sent out. And then, like I said, the town is not corresponded, so.
I think the town has no objection to serving as lead agency. I think that, you know, the only thing I'll say about seeker in as far as zoning code changes go and comprehensive plans is that it's, you know, it's kind of less cut and dry of what the eventual development will be. So you have to kind of look at it as like kind of what does this code envision or this plan envision for growth. So, you know, over time, that's what we'll have to look at, you know, and how it'll affect the environment. And it also, when we talk about that, it's also important to know what's already there in the U zone, right? This is not, you know, it's not like the U zone's gonna disappear, new development's gonna come tomorrow. We have to understand kind of what's already there and how, like, you know, a series of incremental changes over time would affect the character of the district, I guess, right, Steve?
Yes.
Do you want all of your main business moved to that 23rd, have one meeting?
I think that'd be good. That way we're not, as much as I like to see everybody, I think, one day, months is good. Yeah.
We could do that instead of the annual Christmas party.
Yeah, we should have a plan. All right, is there any new business that people wanna bring forward?
That email that we got, the correspondence, is that something then when we do the review that we'll put into the record?
Yeah, it would be, you know, it was sent to the city, so it'd be part of the public record, correct? Yeah, so that's kinda what I meant, so there was, you know, we received a written correspondence from, I guess the property manager of Woodridge Apartments, or the company that manages them, and they expressed concern over the U-zone amendments as is, and they threatened in Article 78, I mean, they said Article 78 would be like a waste of everybody's time and money, but they did mention that term. I think subsequent correspondence from the mayor said that is no longer, litigation is no longer a concern, but my personal sentiment is that if the threat of litigation's out there, it means we have to be careful anyway, even if they've withdrawn it for now, it doesn't mean that they won't change their
Right.
mind, right, so.
So am I naive enough in asking that the U stands for university?
Correct.
Nothing gets
It's a
by
damn
me.
basket zone. It's a damn zone.
I thought you were
Damn-
zoning
damn-
out a bit, but you're paying
Well,
attention.
I mean, I had heard some things about it extending into the
And we
city.
could make like, we could kind of have like a scale where we say the U zone, the who zone, the U
Right,
zone.
yeah, right. Abbott and Costello. So.
There's no other business to discuss, motion to adjourn.